It's his birthday. Barack Obama is 60. I stopped celebrating my birthday when I was 12, but some adults are really into it. So is he. And how about that spread? This is Martha's Vineyard. It's going to be this weekend. Steven Spielberg is going to be there. We're hearing George Clooney, Oprah. Should be really, really great for him. And everything's great for him. He's a billionaire. And it just hit me today. You know, he's never really had a job. We all know he never broke a sweat as president. And how about on his way up the ladder, huh? Night school position at Chicago Law School. I don't think he worked too hard there. How hard do you have to work on those books when you are the subject, when you write about yourself? And I know being Mr. Michelle Obama was probably challenging at times, but basically he's had a very cake life. And right now just might be the most interesting time of his life. Remember this?
If I could make an arrangement where I had a stand-in, a front man or front woman, and they had an earpiece in, and I was just in my basement in my sweats, looking through the stuff, and then I could sort of deliver the lines, but somebody else was doing all the talking and ceremony. Wow. I'd be fine with that.
A lot of people think that's the arrangement that's going on right now. See how pleased Stephen Colbert seemed to be with that? Here's what infuriates me about that and the birthday party. This man, we gave him all of the prestige in the world. The American people elected him twice. And what is he doing with all of that status, all of that power? He's cashing in and throwing himself a ridiculous party. What's happening in Chicago right now? The neighborhood where he got his start. Yes, soaring, soaring, soaring. That town, cities across America are in crisis, but his own backyard. You know what he could do? And it's not pie in the sky. He could go there, roll up his sleeves, and negotiate a truce between these warring gangs that are killing children. But he won't do that. He won't do that because he'd have to break a sweat. There was a time, a long time ago, where at least he talked very powerfully and honestly about what afflicts a huge portion of our country, and he could have brought change like no one else.
Too many fathers are MIA. Too many fathers are AWOL. You and I know this is true everywhere, but nowhere is it more true than in the African-American community. We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime. They're 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in prison.
He was right then. He'd still be right today, but he'd rather party. He could save lives. He has the status. He commands the respect in Chicago and other urban centers. He could bring about lasting change, but he'd rather party with movie stars. It's all about cashing in, not only at his level, but even at the lieutenant colonel level in the United States Army.
I was the driving force behind this whole thing. I'm getting some chills thinking about it right now.
Ooh, that's Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman, U.S. Army, retired. Remember him? He made a great spectacle out of himself and let himself be used by the swamp for, was it the first or second impeachment against Donald Trump? I don't remember. He listened in on that phone call and went running to the cops, essentially. The phone call was fine. We saw the transcript. We know he's allowed the president to talk like that if he chooses to, and I'll get to that in a moment. Something you probably don't know about this guy, if you remember him at all, he's out there hawking a book right now. His bosses, his superiors at the White House had grave doubts about this man and how he was conducting himself.
Mr. Morrison, you testified in your deposition that you had issues with Colonel Vindman's judgment. Is that right?
It is, sir.
And you said specifically that you had concerns with Colonel Vindman exercising, quote, appropriate judgment as to whom he said what. Is that right?
It is, sir.
You testified that Dr. Hill, your predecessor at NSC, told you that she had concerns about Colonel Vindman's judgment. Is that right?
It is, sir.
And you testified that Colonel Vindman did not always adhere to the chain of command. Is that right?
I believe so, yes, sir.
You testified that you were aware of issues with Colonel Vindman trying to access information outside his lane. Is that correct?
Sir, I believe I stated that I was aware that there were those who were concerned about that. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. You testified that Colonel Vindman was not included on certain trips. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you testified that colleagues expressed concerns to you about Colonel Vindman leaking information. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was his boss. Now, he said he was very friendly with Fiona Hill, another national security staffer. Here's what she had to say about him. Overlooked by the fake news, but she said this.
And I was concerned that if, for example, Colonel Vindman might decide to leave the military, that perhaps he wasn't as well suited for something that would be much more political. I did not feel that he had the political antenna to deal with something that was straying into domestic politics.
Hey, a guy who has bad political antenna working at the White House. He wasn't fitting in. That's the between the lines message here, particularly for those of us who served in the military. This is when I really knew he was a fraud, when he broke out his own fit rep and started reading from it. Take a look at this.
Your boss had concerns about your judgment. Your former boss, Dr. Hill, had concerns about your judgment. Your colleagues had concerns about your judgment, and your colleagues felt that there were times when you leaked information. Any idea why they have those impressions, Colonel Vindman?
Yes, Representative Jordan, I guess I'll start by reading Dr. Hill's own words, as she attested to in my last evaluation that was dated middle of July, right before she left. Alex is a top 1% military officer and the best Army officer I've worked with in my 15 years of government service. He is brilliant, unflappable, and exercises excellent judgment.
Well, here's the little secret. Dr. Hill doesn't have time to be filling out Army fitness reports. So what happens there, everybody who goes to the White House is considered the top 1% of whatever organization has detailed them to the White House, usually. They write their own fitness reports. Yes, they do. They actually write it out themselves and then give it to somebody like Fiona Hill for a signature. So these are his words. These are his words about himself. Now, we just heard what Fiona Hill thought about him. Didn't have much of a political antenna. Also, Tim Morrison had deep concerns about his judgment. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. He already got his money. The book sales are irrelevant. He got in advance, and here's the book, and he's running around trying to sell it. And as he does so, he's revealing himself, I believe. Watch this.
And we could have been in a world where there would be 4 more years of Trump, there would be more harm to public servants, there would be less accountability. The erosion that we saw within the departments and agencies could have caused kind of the collapse of good governance, and we could have ended up being a completely different country. This is not an exaggeration. This is 100% my strongly held belief that we could have been in an entirely different country at the end of another 4 years of Trump.
We could have been in a world where there was 4 more years of Trump. We could have been if he and the swamp didn't do something. I think that's almost a confession. That's almost a confession. You know, a lot of people do think that the country would have been better had President Trump stayed in office. It's not his role to be making these kinds of observations. Now, he's retired, but he was doing this while he was on active duty, and that is treachery. Now, this all went to his head. Who stands around with magazines in front of the mirror, taking pictures and autographing those magazines? Look at that. Time, and he signs it himself. Sorry, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, you are no Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Now, there was a hero that everybody paid attention to in the summer of 1987. And he became a successful author and broadcaster in the aftermath of Iran-Contra because America liked him and they knew him. And oh, by the way, Time Magazine, take a look at this, 6 times on the cover of Time Magazine. The Vindman story, though, reminds me, and the book and everything, how so many people in the swamp, they pretend it's about public service, but they're really in it for the fun. And maybe even for the money and the prestige and fans now, Twitter, whatnot. Mike McFaul, ambassador to Russia under Barack Obama. He was also a White House aide for a time, and you would think he's all about service. Now he's a university professor, and he shows up on TV, all about service. No, so many of these guys are in it for money and fame. According to him, He got into an exchange over Twitter, a direct private exchange with a troll. And look at what he wrote about what he values, okay? I have a job for life at the best university in the world. I live in a giant house in paradise. I make close to $1 million a year. And I have adoring fans on TV and 500,000 followers on Twitter, 99% who also admire me. And by the way, at the end there, he says, I feel sorry for people like you, I guess, who don't have the $1 million and the big house and all that stuff. It makes so much sense now that this guy worked for Barack Obama. Talk about valuing a big house and money and fame, right? Right.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.